The morning sun peeked over the hills of Goma, its golden rays piercing through the heavy smoke that still lingered from last night's gunfire. The air smelled of burning wood, dust, and fear. Streets that were once filled with traders and children playing were now lined with soldiers, their rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders as they patrolled a city that no longer felt like home. Mariam moved carefully through the market, stepping over broken crates and torn sacks of beans. She clutched a small bag of cassava flour in one hand and held the tiny fingers of her youngest daughter, Aisha, in the other. She had been up before dawn, standing in line for food that barely existed. The prices had tripled overnight, and she had spent her last francs on what little she could carry. But it was never enough. "Have you heard anything about Rutshuru?" Mariam whispered to an old woman selling dried fish under a tattered umbrella. The woman glanced around before answering. "The rebels are moving closer. More villages burned, more people gone. No one knows what the government is doing anymore." Mariam's heart clenched. Her husband, Jean-Paul, had disappeared 3 months ago, taken, maybe killed, by one of the many armed groups that roamed the eastern provinces. No letters, no calls, no body to bury. Just silence. She refused to believe he was dead. Every night, she prayed he would walk through the door. Every morning, she woke up to disappointment. Chapter 2. The Child Soldier's Choice. In a refugee camp outside the city, 16-year-old David sat near the fence, staring at the mountains in the distance. He hated this place. The tent smelled of sickness, the food was never enough, and the nights were filled with the cries of the hungry and the wounded. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in school, sitting in a classroom, learning about science and history. His father, a schoolteacher, had always told him education was the key to a better life. But books couldn't stop bullets. When the war reached their village, armed men came. They didn't ask questions. They dragged people from their homes, beat them, and forced the young boys into trucks. David had hidden in the forest, watching as his father was taken away. That was the last time he saw him. Now he was alone, and every day he felt the pressure to join the fighters. That night, as he lay on the cold dirt, he overheard two young men whispering near the fence. "They want more recruits," one said. "The government isn't doing anything, and the rebels are getting stronger." David closed his eyes. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to kill. But what choice did he have? If he stayed here, he would starve. If he left, he might die. Chapter 3. The Silent War in Kinshasa. Thousands of kilometers away, in the capital city of Kinshasa, politicians sat in air-conditioned offices discussing peace. President Mumbere leaned back in his leather chair as his ministers read out reports from the east. "The situation in North Kivu is becoming unstable," one of them said. "The rebels are advancing." The president sighed. "And the army? They need more funding, more weapons, more support." Funding. That was always the excuse. Money flowed into the country, millions from foreign governments, billions from corporations mining Congo's vast resources. Yet, none of it seemed to reach the soldiers who were supposed to protect the people. Outside the palace walls, protests were growing. People were demanding action, tired of the same promises that never became reality. But the government had learned to silence voices quickly. Journalists were arrested. Activists disappeared. The streets were watched. Behind closed doors, deals were being made. A mining executive from a foreign company shook hands with a Congolese official. "We'll invest in your infrastructure," the businessman said, smiling. "But we need security in the mining zones." Security meant soldiers guarding the mines. Security meant ignoring the suffering of the people. Security meant more war. Chapter 4. The Struggle to Survive. Back in Goma, Mariam returned to the shelter where her children waited. The walls were cracked and the roof leaked when it rained, but at least it was a place to sleep. Her eldest son Samuel was sitting by the door, watching the street. "Mama," he said softly, "will Papa come back?" Mariam knelt beside him, touching his face. "I don't know, my love, but we have to believe." That night, the sky was alive with fire. The rebels had attacked a nearby village, and people were running, fleeing toward Goma, toward the camps, toward anywhere they could hide. Mariam held her children close, her heart pounding. If the rebels reached the city, what would happen to them? Chapter 5. A different fight. David had made his decision. He would not pick up a gun. He would not join the men who had destroyed his home. Instead, he would fight with his mind. He would fight with